So this is a webinar on engaging citizens in the map drawing. There's some new technologies that have come out that are really going to make this a lot easier for people to draw their own maps of their communities, and make them the things that they can send on to the folks that are doing the actual map drawing, and that they can use to communicate with other people in their community about what they think should be kept together and so forth. So this is a really important development. And moreover, these tools are easy to use, and we're going to have a little demonstration of that. And I'm very pleased to say that in addition to being joined by Tyler, who will be doing some presenting on the work he's been doing looking at Greensboro, we'll also have a special guest of Michaela Parnell, who is on the Representable team. And we're going to be focusing in particular on that methodology and that toolkit that they've developed. But there are others out there as well. So we're very glad to have Michaela, especially since she is a North Carolinian. So the other, besides Representable, the main other tool that has been developed, at least so far in this general area, is called Districtor. And warning, when you type that, your autocorrect will make that into district every time. So just be prepared for that. But in any case, which has been developed by a team at Tufts that's part of their gerrymandering program up there. And Representable is been developed by Princeton. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin by taking an overview of opportunities for citizen engagement in map drawing and why that's important, and then go into talking about the new tools. And this is really important. You do not have to be a techie to use these tools. And as I mentioned, we have Michaela Parnell as our special guest, and then we'll do a demonstration. So redistricting really should be about representing citizens and not about politicians drawing safe districts. And advances in map drawing technology have made gerrymandering much worse. So now citizens can fight back with some of these techniques that are out there. And so the ability to really integrate data into mapping and really fine tune the gerrymanders has become more and more of a problem. If you go back even into the 90s, you can see the old maps being drawn pen and pencil and markers and God only knows what. But these new advances really do open the door, and we hope that they will encourage citizens to get involved and get them a way to do that. So here we have something that has been created by the interaction of Academy and the emergence of apps, which we're all familiar with. First, there were the professional tools, and some of those have been around for quite some time, such as Maptitude and Esri, which is the firm that develops shapefiles. And these are very good tools, but they are expensive. A Maptitude license costs thousands of dollars, and they are proprietary. They can only be used by people who have a license. And this makes it very hard for citizens to get access to these, not only because of their cost, but because they do require certain expertise. And academics have become also a lot more interested in gerrymandering. This has been going on for a while, but it has certainly accelerated. And that has been further impetus has been given to that by the fact that there are so many tools that can be used for analyzing the maps and for identifying gerrymanders. And that's continuing. That work is very much continuing. And these apps are, apps are available for all kinds of things, spotting who's near you that's had a positive COVID test, or hunting for gerrymanders. So the merger of the availability of apps, academic interest, and the increasing emphasis on data analytics and map drawing has led to these new free and easy to use tools that citizens can use to push back against gerrymandering. So they can be used, to draw districts or even whole maps, but we think that really the best use is to use them to engage and involve communities, in the process. Both Representable and Districtor focus on enabling citizens to identify what are called communities of interest on citizen-drawn maps. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. It's a very important concept in redistricting, but it's also kind of squishy. So what these maps do is they enable citizens and others to really operationalize the squishy concept of communities of interest. And by operationalize, I mean take it from an idea to something that you can really apply to a community on a map. And this makes it easier for communities to define themselves as well on maps. with assistance or on their own, it's a lot easier. And it therefore will make it harder for the people who are drawing the maps officially to ignore the need to keep communities whole, to keep people who have common interests together. And it also provides a basis for assessing whether the maps reflect communities for purposes of more responsive representation. And gerrymandering is all about having maps that are responsive to the citizens' votes. Not only that who wins, it depends on how they vote, but also on being able to hold officials accountable by voting them out. So that's a really key aspect of gerrymandering, is that it makes it harder for citizens to hold their officials accountable, and that seriously undermines democracy. So what is a community of interest? It has a couple of different definitions, and they kind of show how squishy this is because they emphasize different things. It's an area with recognized similarities of interests that include but are not limited to ethnic, racial, economic, tribal, social, cultural, geographic, or historic identities. And the term, it can, in certain circumstances, it can include political subdivisions such as counties, municipalities, tribal lands and reservations, and school districts. But it should not include common relationships of a given area with a particular political party or political candidates. And that definition comes from H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which has been introduced in Congress and includes sort of a overall basket of reforms that have to do with voting. And if adopted, by the way, it would mandate a commission, an independent citizens commission, to draw the congressional maps, which would be nice. Would apply this year if passed soon. And the other definition here comes from the League, a group of individuals who are likely to have comparable legislative and community concerns based on similarities, and who therefore would benefit from cohesive representation in the legislature and Congress, county commissions, or other elected bodies. So these two definitions kind of highlight different things. I mean, beginning with the League one, emphasizes that the idea is to produce better representation, so that people that have common interests have representatives who can really focus on those interests, rather than being divided up so that no particular representative really has much interest in what their issues are. But that also that there are a wide variety of factors that can be used to define a community. I mean, it may be a historic identity, that everybody moved to that area from a particular location, or that they've had long-standing ties of cooperation or whatever. I mean, it can be any factor that makes people say, yeah, we have something in common that we want our representative to pay attention to. It's not defined in North Carolina law as yet, but this is very often a feature of legislation that's been introduced not only here but in other places, and it is included in laws in many other countries and many other states, and national laws if we ever get them. So what's the link between these different things? Well, communities of interest, as I say, they include cohesive, geographically concentrated groups that are defined, sometimes can be defined by race. And in the South, racial and partisan gerrymandering are indistinguishable, as Justice Kagan has pointed out, and many others. But communities of interest are about much more than race, and they provide a whole other way of looking at what should be in a district. And defining COIs can help protect against gerrymandering. In particular, it can introduce considerations other than party advantage, like, why are you drawing the map this way? Well, it's because all of these people, this is a fishing community, they want to be kept together. Over here, they're just a few miles away, but they're a tourism-focused community. And then back over that way, there are a bunch of folks who grow blueberries or whatever. And so they have interests that may play out differently when it comes to legislation. And so that's an advantage to really document that and bring it to the fore. And they also, by creating these communities of interest and document them on maps, this provides the information in an actionable form. Well, where are those blueberry growers? And what are the confines of that tourism area? Or, where there's this old Swedish community. Well, how does that go into the rural areas, or is it concentrated in a couple of towns? So let's take a look at Representable, which is a very interesting tool. And its aim, which comes off their material, is to deliver previously unavailable community of interest data to map makers and to enable better public engagement, democratizing the data submission process, and allowing individuals and indeed groups to submit maps with public comments. And it therefore also provides support to journalists and analysts, nonprofits, academics, policy groups, everyone with data to really look at the proposed maps and get a better sense of whether or not they are splitting communities or keeping communities whole. And a really important factor here is that they are a student. This is a student project, which is so impressive. And moreover, all of them are undergrads. They're working as part of the Princeton Gerrymandering team, but they themselves are all undergrads. And we are very glad to have one of their team members here with us, whom I'll be introducing in a moment, Michaela Parnell. She's from the Wilmington area, and she's down here because of COVID. But she's a pre-law and public and international affairs student at Princeton. And she's their outreach coordinator. So this is her chance to outreach in her own community. Before, while she was a student, and before she was a student, she was the professional development director for Our Health Matters, which is a student-led organization. She's also tutored at Go Peer and was a business development intern at up Wilmington. I think I'm missing a word there. Step up Wilmington. So really glad to have Michaela with us, and hoping to have an interesting discussion as we look at the technique and the maps. So one of the good features of Representable is that they offer the opportunity to do community mapping projects so that individuals that are in a community can come together and develop and share maps. And not everyone's going to agree on what's in the community and what's out, or what's important to that community and what's not. So this is a way to really have a dialogue that gets into the specifics that relate to drawing the map, and provides also, very importantly, a basis for discussing which communities need to be kept together as the maps are drawn, and then to present that information to map readers and map drawers in a machine readable form. The maps can be exported to a variety of platforms such as Maptitude, but also to PDF or something else that they can be shared across the community and encourage these dialogues. So really, this is a hands-on organizing tool to help get people ready for the redistricting and to engage them in a way that is very accessible. Here's a kind of a snapshot from a community mapping drive that is underway, and this is in Greensboro, just as an example. So you can see there where groups or individuals have drawn districts, have drawn communities of interest, and overlying that are, in this case, state house districts. But one of the nice features they have is that you can see how what you've drawn, what you think is in your community, how that fits with the different levels of congressional districts and legislative districts and so forth. And you can see down here, for example, that this community, first off, these two people have somewhat different ideas about how large their community should be, but this also does cut across a district boundary, as does this one. So that would be something to look at. Well, maybe this could be moved over a little bit, or how the real life of communities can be better reflected and to get better representation. So I think I have managed to link this up. Let's just see. This is supposed to be linked. Oops, wait a minute. Come on. Okay, there we go. This is they produced a lot of good promotional stuff, and this is a little 2-minute YouTube video on drawing your community. This is New York, as you guys probably recognize. And looking at a high school, educational community is a good example of something that can define a community. So as you collect, you're just collecting them by clicking on an area, and these are census blocks, I think. It's all menu driven, no programming or anything is involved. Yes, and everything has to be connected to itself, which is what we call is contiguous. In other words, just like a regular district, communities of interest don't work well if they're scattered across the landscape. It needs to be a single area. And you can undo what you've done. If you've got it's too big or you don't think you've got the right groups, you can change it. You just save it. And we'll be putting other stuff in the, I have to figure out how to get back out of there without losing my screen save. Okay, there we go. Just check I'm in the right place. Yes, okay. So now we're going to be looking at East Greensboro, which is an interesting area. It's part of Greensboro. It tends to be historically an area with a high percentage of Black population. And you also notice that the gray area is the part that is officially part of the Greensboro municipality. And like a lot of North Carolina municipalities, it has little pieces scattered around the different parts around it that are not contiguous. That are connected by roads, I guess. And then it's also interesting that East Greensboro is not part of the official Greensboro perimeter. So Tyler, do you want to take over and talk about, a little bit more about your community?
Sure. You can go to the next slide.
I'm trying. Just a minute. Why it's not advancing? There we go. Yes. So this also is go ahead and explain. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So this is the community that I drew using the same steps that you just saw in the video. And one of the things that I kind of grappled with was, how large do I want to make this? And that's one of the things that you can decide as you're making the maps. If you want it to be a really tight, concise area, you can do that, or you can do a larger area. And I chose, I guess, a fairly broad area, which includes parts of the actual city of Greensboro, eastern city of Greensboro, but also a suburban area that is just east of the city limits and south of the city limits as well, which, as Jennifer mentioned, does tend to have a higher Black population. And you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is that as you create a community, you can record information about it in this area down here, where you can describe the economic interests or describe more about why you thought it was a community and what its needs are. And
Yes.
Michaela, feel free to to come in and comment on this. I mean, we want to moving into that sort of part of this. Go ahead, Tom.
Yep. So my basic frustration, I'll put it, with the way that these districts have been drawn for years at the congressional level especially, is that they have drawn the districts in ways that split up the city or the greater area so that people that live, for example, where I do, are packed together and then paired with other communities way across. I mean, you can see this is the 2011 Congressional Redistricting, and what they specifically did is they picked areas in eastern and southeastern Greensboro, but again, primarily has a high Black population, high minority population. They also took portions of High Point, portions of eastern Winston-Salem, and then they went right down I-85 all the way to Charlotte. And I think it would be, better if you could put all the people in Greensboro together. I don't think that's or in the greater Greensboro area together. I don't think that's all that much to ask. But you can also see that the purple district kind of goes all over as well. It encapsulates parts of the western part of the city and northwestern, and then also further south and east, and then connects it with more rural parts up into Rockingham and Caswell and Alamance counties. But this map was struck down in 2011. Well, not in 2011, it was struck down later on, but it was struck down as a racial gerrymander. And so it was redrawn in 2016. So you can go ahead. And this is what they did in 2016. So instead of packing, they decided to crack. And so they cracked the city and the county. And you can see that this is the infamous map in which North Carolina A&T was cut in half right down the middle of the campus. And you can see as well how in the area that I made the community in Eastern Greensboro, how that is cut as well in halves. And those in part are connected again with Burlington and places further north and south into Rockingham County, and then areas over just west are connected into High Point and Davidson County, and that district also goes all the way into Iredell. So again, this map was struck down as a partisan gerrymander in 2019. And you can go to the next one. And so lastly, this map, you can see I'm smiling because I like it, because they actually kept the county together. They kept the general area together. Again, not too much to ask. This map was, though, a part of the court order redrawing in 2019, and it will be redrawn this year. So this district will only be in effect through 2022, and so we really want to make sure we have well-drawn districts in the future, because whatever the upcoming districts look like, that is going to be in effect through 2031, unless it is affected by any court challenges. But again, I don't really think it's all that complicated to keep a city or a suburban and urban area together, and that's really all that I was trying to explain with the map that I drew. I certainly think that our legislators in Raleigh can do that.
They can do it just about any way they want. Sometimes they say they had to do it a particular way, but that's not necessarily the case. Well, Michaela, I mean, it's so interesting that this is an undergraduate project. Can you talk a little bit about, how you got interested in gerrymandering? Being, of course, from North Carolina, that helps. What it's been like to work on the project.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, this was a class project. It was originally a computer science project. And the way it kind of worked was faculty members could put in requests for things that they thought could be a good computer project ideas. And then Kyle, our executive director, and a few of the members of our founding board took on this idea and decided to create Representable, which was called something else at the time. And then as they kind of worked on it and developed it, they realized like this could be a real tool that would be useful for people. And so for that reason, they decided to start providing Representable as a tool to the community. And as for me, I joined Representable's team in September. And yes, I was very interested in gerrymandering, very interested in redistricting because of my ties to North Carolina. And I had a lot of just experience and knowledge just looking through kind of the maps and reading about how gerrymandering works based in North Carolina. I thought it'd be interesting to see how this tool could be used across the country as something to kind of combat gerrymandering or to give community members kind of their own voice or their own input in the process. I do think gerrymandering was always something that I was like, oh yeah, it happens, but like I have no say over how it happens, you know, like you're so far removed from the process. So it was great to see that this tool is really trying to put people in like the center and communities in the center of the process, as opposed to them being a like removed extra step.
And are you seeing a lot of interest in Representable around the country? I mean, how are people using it out there? I know the data hasn't come down, but still, how are people putting it to work to begin to define their communities?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually seeing a lot of interest, especially right now with the new redistricting cycle coming up. I think we're currently in 14 or 15 states, maybe more. And I know that some of our key partners, we work with the League of Women Voters in quite a few different states, including Virginia. We're in Nevada, we're in Michigan, we're in Illinois, places all over the country. We work with the Voters Not Politicians in Michigan. We work with the Princeton Gerrymandering project really closely. They have quite a few contacts as well in different parts of the country. So we're seeing lots and lots of interest in this tool, and people are interested because it is something that's so easy to use. It's completely free, so anyone can use it. And many organizations like that they can really work with our team to create a product that works best for their state.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, one of the things that's so important is being able to really give practical definition to communities of interest by saying, well, this is what people think their community is. Because I in the legislature, they were last time they withdrew. I think it was, maybe it was the time before. Who knows? I was in the room, in the committee room, and they were. You know, some of the legislators were pushing for the inclusion of communities of interest as one of the factors to be considered. But the response was, well, how do you define it? You know, nobody can define it. People have all these vague definitions. We can't include something if we can't really measure it. And the legislators were not able to, that wanted to include communities of interest, were not able to come up with, you know, a definition that would be accepted, because it is very hard to operationalize if you don't have something like this tool. What does it really mean? So I think it really could not only be helpful in drawing maps, but the fact that it exists and that people can respond and come to some kind of consensus on what their community should be kept together. I think it may also help in legislation.
Absolutely. And that's actually another important part of Representable that we haven't shown yet, but something that's crucial to the process is not just creating a map, but also including survey information. So we ask users questions about things like the economic interest in their community, environmental interest in their community, needs and concerns in their community, cultural and historical interests and cultural activities, services, just different things that get them thinking about what their community of interest might include. But it also provides that extra piece for legislators to see, why is this community created? Like, what's the justification for this community? And in that way, they can see like what communities kind of have similarities, which ones have differences, and avoid just saying, oh, well, we looked at the communities, we looked at the maps, but we didn't know what they meant, so we didn't use them or we didn't focus on them. So that extra piece of Representable is something that really adds to the process, because it forces legislators to not only look at the map, but also the justification for the map. And it also helps them to take these maps into context with each other. So if certain communities all have similar services, they have similar needs and concerns, versus communities that have completely different survey information, they can kind of understand which ones might be useful together, which ones might be different, and use that to create fair maps.
And it could also provide a good organizing tool, because even in the community, like suppose you have, like I say, fishing communities or something, they know the other communities are kind of there, but how they're defined and what's in them and what's not, you know, may be difficult for them, to really get their hands around. So, you know, it seems like it provides a good tool to help communities get organized, to be able to express their views. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's completely true. The other thing that's, I think, special about Representable is that we do work really closely with organizations. So because organizations have the ability to create their own accounts on the site, create their own mapping drives, collect community maps, and then use those maps, it also adds power and testimony to the users, in the sense that now organizations kind of can see who it is who's a part of their community, and take action responsibly. And also it gives the organizations opportunities to create unity maps or to create different types and do different types of analysis on the data before legislators get to it. And that helps to really focus in on these communities as well.
Yeah, that's an important feature, is that in addition to showing the types of districts, you can also see the, more data on the different communities that you've drawn in terms of the population, and kind of get a sense of how they compare to a typical district, or district size at different levels. And then obviously county commission districts may be much smaller than congressional districts, and legislative districts someplace in the middle. So the people, as they're drawing the map, they can really be looking at that and having a sense of how their community would fit into a possible district at these different levels, and communicate that information with each other. So yeah, we're definitely planning to use it as an organizing tool in our project to look at county commissions and encourage in counties that have a county commission made up of individual districts, to encourage them to use this tool as the counties approach redrawing their districts, in addition to the legislative or congressional districts.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind if I address some of the questions I've gotten in the chat?
Yeah, we probably should turn to that. Actually, why don't we just, I think I have a couple more slides here, and then we can get to the questions, but definitely.
Sounds good.
In fact, that is the last slide. So we are at the questions. So go for it.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I do want to address a few of the questions in the chat. I believe the first one is from John. So this one's asking, how will the project we're discussing not democratize the process of gerrymandering or provide more justification for gerrymandering? And that is a great question. It's also asking why it's better than simply using algorithms to prioritize compactness. And that's a great question. So the idea about communities of interest, you're not creating necessarily a district on Representable, you're creating specifically your community. So this is different than using like an algorithm or just using like geographic boundaries. Map makers typically already have access to those sorts of things. So this is providing a unique piece that map makers wouldn't have access to by allowing communities and community members to specifically define the places and the area that they would consider their community to be. So it's a little bit different than that. And how it doesn't necessarily justify gerrymandering in the sense that each community created by an individual might be different. It might have different reasoning. But again, this is just one piece of many pieces that are necessary in order to create districts. But it's one of the only pieces that takes into account the community's opinion and public input when it comes to the map making process. So when I go to create my map, I go to create my community, I can highlight things that are very important in my community. Like, for example, maybe my church, maybe there's a school that a lot of people are around. Maybe a lot of members of my community shop in certain places, or they get their services in certain places. I'm the one who knows that, and maybe a legislator who doesn't live in my community doesn't know that. So I'm giving them unique information that they couldn't just find from like a map or a set of data about my community specifically. So hopefully that answers that question there. I'm also getting a question about, oh yeah, and this is more of a comment, but yes, it would be a great tool for high school and college departments. We're actually working with Nevada, the Vote Nevada program, to create like more like a curriculum around Representable as well, so that it could be used in schools and that it could be used in different college departments. But absolutely, this is something that could be used. And like I said, it's free for everyone. So if this is something that students would be interested in, if there are any teachers in the room that would be interested in it, that's absolutely possible as well. I'm getting what organizations in North Carolina are using Representable. So we're actually talking to a few organizations in North Carolina. Obviously, we're talking to the League of Women Voters in North Carolina. We've also talked to Democracy NC, and we've talked to just recently All on the Line North Carolina chapter about using Representable. Would Representable students work with individual communities that are trying to define themselves? If yes, how to contact Representable? So that's a great question. If there is any questions or concerns, we do have an email, Representable does, and we get back to everyone who sends an email to that chat and answer any questions they may have. We're a very small team, so we can't like work with every individual community, but we do try to reach out to people and provide support with the tool. We also reach out to organizations and try to train them on how to use the tool so that they can answer questions if their community members have questions. So I will put the email in the chat for Representable. So if anyone here has questions that I don't get a chance to answer, or if someone in the future, you try to use the website and you have a question, feel free to contact team@representable.org, and either I or one of the other outreach coordinators will get back to you and be able to answer those questions. Okay, let's see. So this one says, is demographic data embedded in representable? That's also a great question. So as of right now, when you're creating your map, you're able to see the population of the community of interest that you create. When you're creating your community of interest, you're actually using census block groups. So there is that like demographic data connected to each census block group. So as you're clicking on it, you're able to see the population. And then once you've saved and submit your map, as like the page that Tyler showed us of his map, on that page, you would be able to see more demographic data. As of right now, the only thing you can see is population, and that's just because we haven't gotten the updated census data yet. But once it comes out, you'll be able to see other demographics as well on that page. So the only thing is you wouldn't be able to see it as you're creating the map. And we do that intentionally because we don't want people to, again, get bogged down in things that these legislators already know, like they already know the demographics and the census data in each location. We really want them to focus on the unique perspective that they can provide to the map making process. I'm getting this about maptitude. Let's see. Okay, I'm not quite sure if I can answer this question, so I'll leave this one for you, Jennifer, and then you can answer about the North Carolina GOP. I'm not quite
Get
sure.
out of this sharing so I can see that. Yeah, actually, I have a question for you, Michaela, which just occurred to me. Although, you know, me, I'm always coming up with other things that you can add to this. This is such a great tool. Of course, I had a conversation recently with some of the folks in the Princeton Gerrymandering Project about being able to do quick response to maps as they're drawn by the legislature, or for that matter, if someone else draws maps that have some traction to them. And the question is whether it would be possible to actually display those maps, you know, on Representable, such that people could, you know, could see how that map, how the House draft map for the legislature, for example, how that, or different draft maps that are introduced, how those would, you know, how those would affect the communities that people have identified.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So we're always adding new features to Representable. Right now, some of the features that we're actually working on are being able to actually see the maps created. So as people create maps for North Carolina, for example, everyone will be able to see the maps available in North Carolina. We're also adding a public input section directly on Representable itself. So you could send your map directly to your legislator, or if there's a public input portal, go directly to that portal and submit your map. So those are some of the things we're working on right now. And then that's also a really great idea that we could consider as well. I think that the goal is to make the tool as simple as possible for you to make your map and then have someone see it and use it and it be effective. So anything that is going to make that more effective, more accessible to people is something that we're interested in.
I'm trying to find the maptitude question. Not that I'm going to claim to be an expert. Yeah, maptitude, which uses a similar technique. And one thing I wanted to say is census data, you hear the term census block, census block group and census tract. The easiest way to remember the block is actually conceptually a city block, more or less in size. So that's the smallest unit that the census uses to define population, collections. They're not necessarily city blocks in every location, of course, but they're the smallest group. And then those aggregate into a block group, which is a bunch of contiguous blocks that that make up at least a piece of a community. And then beyond that, they have census tracts, which aggregate a bunch of block groups. And then above that is the county. So they use the within, so that all of the census units are they aggregate up to the county. They don't cross over county boundaries. And maptitude, yes, maptitude can be combined with a lot of different databases in addition to census data, for sure. That's one of the things that has changed about gerrymandering and made it worse, is that there's so much data available on all of us that talks about how that it can be used to analyze how we might vote, in addition, of course, to voting data itself. And that really enables much more fine-tuning of a gerrymander to try to see that you've got districts that are going to support one set of candidates as opposed to another. In this case, I don't think there are any plans to upload any of that beyond, as I say, the official data. which is just as well. And we're not under any illusion that either party, for that matter, is not going to want to select its voters. I mean, the state was gerrymandered by the Democrats when they were in power for 100 years. It was only when then the GOP took over, they gerrymandered. Now technology has made that gerrymandering worse because they can fine tune it rather than using colored markers on maps, which they were doing before. And I do not know what consulting firm that the NCGOP is going to be using, given that they were previously using Hoffler. His partner, whose name is slipping my mind, I believe is in South Carolina, is still out there. But Hoffler was, who has passed away, who was their main map maker and a genius map maker. One could say an evil genius, but he is no longer with us. And so I'm sure they'll be using, there are lots of people out there. This technology has been around and is continually being upgraded. So they're still out there. But we cannot assume, I mean, both sides use consultants. And yes, agree that looking at the problem of whether it's really necessary to split or not. Yes, I mean, when they were forced to redraw the, District 12, as it was, then when they redrew it, it was all collapsed into Mecklenburg. And yes, it was said at times that if you went down, if you drove down 85 and opened your doors, you could take out half the population of the district, which is an exaggeration, but nonetheless. Yeah, this question of when a gerrymander is helpful and when it's not is a very complicated one, and I'm not gonna, it's no clear-cut answer, and I'm not gonna try to answer it here. But for sure, there are advantages to both parties in having safe seats, and those are not necessarily advantages to the voters.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and that brings up a good point as well. Representable is a nonpartisan tool. So we have worked with Democratic gerrymanders and also Republican gerrymanders, and our tool is open to be used to end gerrymandering on all sides. So it's not affiliated to one particular party.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you for that. And certainly the league has we're progressive in terms of the policies we advocate, but we are very strictly nonpartisan. We never endorse candidates or collaborate with partisan organizations, except on, we do accept collaboration on policy issues, but we never collaborate on campaign related issues. And so someone has cited Craig Merrill's excellent document looking at the metrics for measuring gerrymandering, including measuring compactness and other features of gerrymandering. It is a very good document. I'm pretty sure it's available on the league website, but if not, anyone email me, I've got it. I actually have asked the Princeton Gerrymandering Project to see if there's something they can do with compactness, because there are many different measures and they give you different results. Like what is the best measure, or is it possible to construct an index so that you get something that is sort of more consistent? But there are many different measures. Most of them are comparing the district to like a standard shape, such as a circle. And this causes the mathematicians to go crazy, because you cannot make a map out of circles, because there would be all those little diamond shaped things between the circles that won't work. But anyway, so compactness is important and it's a good measure, but there are other things as well. And in particular, what communities of interest looks at is whether the people who are being represented can really get the attention of their legislator or their congressperson, because they have a shared interest and there are enough of them. They're not spread across multiple districts. And so this is a very important feature, in addition to things like compactness and, of course, looking out for racial gerrymandering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to add that for everyone who's put their email in the chat, I will save the chat, and then I will send you guys an email with the educational materials that we give out about Representable. So if you want to look more into it and read some more about it, you'll be able to access those. Also, to the question about the case studies that illustrate the functionality of this app, that's a great question. So Representable has not been around long enough to have actually been used in a redistricting cycle because they only happen every 10 years. However, we have been working on a case study right now in Virginia, in Richmond, that will be used as part of a law review that we are writing about representable and about communities of interest. So that's something to keep an eye out for, as well as we've run multiple community user trials and demos, especially in Michigan and in Chicago, Illinois, were like pilot areas. And so we have, from that data, been able to tweak the site so that it was very accessible for users, and also to add functionality for organizations and the things that they've said that they needed specifically out of representable. So hopefully that answers the question there. And I'm also seeing a question about how people using these tools for like municipal level. That's a great question. We actually had a meeting with the National League of, I want to make sure I'm getting this right, NLC, National League of Cities. So we actually talked to them specifically about how they can use the tool for municipal purposes as opposed to like districts and the kind of federal or state sense. And we have been working with them as well to see like what ways we can access the tool municipally. And so one thing that we are considering adding is, and this is something that's on the website as well, once you've created your map, you can actually use data layers to see how they interact with your map, like different counties, zip codes, the school districts is a new thing that we added. We're working on adding precincts, specifically for North Carolina. We're going to add precincts there. And then we're looking into different municipal maps that we can also include as a data layer so that you can see the interface of those with your map. And then does it tend to split precincts or hold them as whole units? That's a great question. And this, I guess I kind of answered it in my previous answer, but yes, we are working on adding precincts as something that you will be able to visualize with your maps to see how they interact with the community of interest that you've drawn.
Yeah, and precincts do tend to some extent, to reflect neighborhoods. I mean, that is not perfectly at all, but certainly we've been encouraging Representable to add precincts, and we know that they're working at it because, of course, precincts are also often the unit with which, from which districts are constructed. Partly because if they were going to use voting data, which they shouldn't be doing, but they do it anyway, that involves using precincts. That's the unit under which all the voting data is made available. There was another question there. Oh, and we are definitely planning to use this we're doing a county redistricting project looking at county commissions. There are 31 counties around the state that have a district-based system where people are, the commissioners are elected, one per district, or in some cases 2 per district, or whatever, but where they are elected by district as opposed to being elected at large in the whole county or some other system. We think that this can be a very useful tool. And we think that's also a great way to educate people about gerrymandering, because it's a level of activity where they can really get involved more easily in dealing with their county commission and the map of just their county, rather than having to think about a map that's being drawn that will include several counties, and that's changing all the time as the drafts come out. But the county's the county. They also, the county commissions play an extremely important role in things like the public health department depends on the county to give it the money. The schools, their budget comes primarily from the county commission. You have, the libraries, the parks, the jails, the courts, the election, the actual expenses to run the elections. All of that comes through the county commissions, and a lot more. So they are very important, and we think that getting people involved at that level and using Representable as a great tool to help them think about their community and what's important and what should be kept together is really, going to be a great way to engage people in gerrymandering. So somebody has asked, what's the best system to get rid of gerrymandering? And the best system, and this is the League's position and has been for a number of years, and I should point out also that the League has opposed gerrymandering since the mid-60s. So it is not something which is tied to the party in power. And during all of that time, until 2011, the Democrats were in charge, and they gerrymandered up one side of the hill and down the other. So including drawing racial gerrymanders that were thrown out in the courts. So it is something that we've held to for a long time and given a lot of thought. We feel the best solution is indeed to involve the voters, in drawing the maps by having a citizens commission that is independent from the legislature, that collects testimony and evidence and goes around in the state and holds hearings, and that draws maps that do not consider partisan data, including voting history or party affiliation, or where incumbents live, but that just looks at things like communities of interest and of course having the right number of people in each district so that they're all the same size. And so an independent commission can do that. There are no independent commissions in the South at all. The closest was just adopted in Virginia, where they approved a constitutional amendment to create a citizens a citizens commission that is as close to independent as you can be and still pass the legislature. So it's a great model, and they're now selecting their commissioners. That model includes half of the members are sitting legislators, evenly split between the two parties, and the other half are citizens who are selected from lists proposed by the legislators, that's screened by retired judges. So that is, and they will be a mix, and include unaffiliated members and potentially third-party members. So it's a very good design, and we're going to be watching how it works. We hope to get a reform this year. I think realistically, given that we still have uniparty control in the legislature, and I should say that one of the challenges in gerrymandering reform is that it's a reform that is strongly advocated, really just totally supported by whichever party is out of power. And then when that party is in power, it tends to switch. And there were some very good independent commissions proposed by Republicans when they were out of power, and they lost interest in them when they came into power. And obviously the Democrats were gerrymandering to an extreme extent when they were in power, and now they're against it. So we hope to get at least a reform that will clarify what criteria should be used in drawing the maps and what process. And within that, having a lot of information for citizens and having them be able to communicate both ways, for them to be able to propose things, to respond to maps, and not just to get information from those who are drawing the maps. That's a really key part of that. And that's why we're so glad to have Representable as a tool that can help citizens really get a feel for this and what they think should be kept together.
Absolutely. And I just want to answer this one
Sure.
last question really quickly. So I asked a question about what if a community of interest is split across counties, and would it still be able to define the community across county lines? So you'd still have the opportunity to do that. The only limit to creating a community is that it has to all connect, so there can't be any gaps. But other than that, you can create communities across bodies of water. I know that's a big problem in Wilmington, is that there's all kinds of bodies of water in between the land masses, but you can create over those. You can create them between counties as well. I think that it would be up to the individual to consider the efficacy of creating it across a county. While you do have the opportunity to do that, it may not be as effective for map makers. So that's just something that you would have to consider personally when you're drawing your community. And I just want to plug one more time that if anyone has any questions, I highly recommend you go to representable.org. I'll also put that in the chat, the link. I highly recommend you go to representable.org and try to create your own community, see what it's like, share the tool with others. And then again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email team@representable.org and we will get back to you. And then everyone who put their email in the chat already, I will add you all to one big email list and send out some educational materials for you to look over.
Yeah, we'll also have, we have some things in the slides, and we will make them available on our YouTube channel, which is Fair Districts NC. Everything that we have is Fair Districts NC. So one word. So our YouTube channel, our website, our Twitter, etc. And someone asks if there are instances where a community is in a district for state or federal voting, yet in a different group for municipal issues. I mean, the maps overlap. Also, with regard to the county question, there are many districts that cut across county boundaries. The North Carolina Constitution says you shouldn't do that, but because of one person, one vote, the districts have to be of the same size population-wise, and that often means that you have to cut across a county boundary. It's something to be avoided, but it is more important to have that equal representation, and also, to represent communities of interest. And as we see, for example, the Charlotte community is now spreading up into Cabarrus in terms of the suburbs and so forth, and there are other instances like that. We've got Rocky Mount, which is sort of spreads over 2 different counties, Nash and Edgecombe, and there are other examples. So it's important to keep the community together for good representation, but state law preferences counties, and so it's in the Constitution. We're stuck with it until someone changes it. Let's see, what else do we have here? I think mostly we have emails. Yes, all kinds of redistricting take place this year. Local, including municipal if they have districts, the counties and the legislature, both houses, and the Congress are all going to be redistricted, as well as potentially water districts and school boards for sure, and other kinds of whatever else is out there that's elected by districts. Let's see if I'm missing any questions here.
I see a question about HR 1, and it does not address state legislatures. The federal Congress does not have any authority over state legislative districts.
Yeah, now it may be if the data is really late, given that the municipal in the the municipal election year, normally they would use those districts now, but state law provides that if the census data is late, that they will provides a a delay mechanism for that. So they would draw when the data is available, and then those maps would take effect later. At this point, it's too late to change the structure of a county in particular, and municipalities, I guess it depends on their charter, but the structure that the counties have been using cannot be changed because it requires taking that to the voters after it passes the commission, and it's too late to do that. But the league advocates for single member districts, if at all possible, because that's where you get that concentrated representation. And there's research that shows that if the analysis was done by, I believe his name's John Curiel at UNC, saying that if you look at zip codes, if zip codes are split in drawing a congressional district, the quality of the representation goes down, because zip codes are defined. The post office drew them to include include an area that was easy to get to, which tends to be concentrated in the downtown area and then spread out, so that people were less likely to had been in contact with their Congress people, less likely to know who they were. So keeping keeping these communities together is really important for the quality of representation both ways. And okay, so we are at time, and I'm hoping that we can get a bill passed before the maps are drawn, and you can help us do that. We need to get that done, and certainly something we're working on. And yes,
Can I just say something?
Week of Wake is yes, and there's wanting to engage the the NCGA. We're part of a group of organizations together that's sort of overseen by Blueprint, that is also mobilizing, and we have our own coalition that is also looking to engage the legislators. And we can lobby, but we cannot we cannot lobby in partisan ways. How do we separate communities of interest from partisan voting demographics? Well, communities of interest, those fishermen, they could be Democrats or Republicans, or those blueberry growers, or the people that live in Eastern Greensboro or whatever. People, they certainly are partisan voting patterns. People tend to clump together, as we've seen, but that doesn't mean that all the communities of interest would be homogeneous on any on in terms of their voting. Some of them perhaps, but yeah, I would like to echo we're at time, just over, so I really want to thank Tyler, and in particular my partner in crime here, and in particular Michaela, and for joining us. And I'm really glad that we've had such people have been so interested in this, and I really hope you'll check it out. And we will have, as I say, links to their instructional materials on YouTube and other materials on our website. And thank you very much. I think everyone else,
And
I skipped a question. Yeah, Tyler?
yes, yes, before we go, I just wanted to say that, there's never been anything like this really before in the redistricting process. I just wanted to underscore that, how this allows us, the citizens, to really have a seat at the table in terms of being able to go in hand and draw our communities. In the past, you didn't have this. So just wanted to really say how revolutionary this is, what Representable doing, what District R is doing. It really is very, very, I think it's a great thing for us, and hopefully it will make a big impact on the maps when they come out.
Yeah, I hope so. And we've seen the impact that Maptitude and the other technologies have had on the other side of the gerrymanderer side, whether that's Democratic or Republican. So it's good that there's some tools like this that are very accessible for citizens to use. And now it's up to all of you guys to actually use them and to enable other people to find out about them. And one of the reasons we've been sort of leaning more towards Representable than Districter, although they're both very good systems and they're actually quite similar, they've kind of been learning from each other, is that Representable has been very responsive and has shown willingness. And I'm not saying that the Tufts people have not, but it just seems that because these are all volunteers and very focused on this, that they've been very committed to making it work. So I want to thank everyone, and in particular thank Tyler and Michaela for joining us. And I am going to save the chat before I forget to do that. And thanks very much, you guys, and goodbye. We're going to wrap it up.